Before he became a headline, before his name was etched into plaques and memorials, Jaime Padron was simply a man who believed in service. Born and raised in San Angelo, Texas, Padron was the kind of person who didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to earn respect. Friends, family, and fellow officers would later describe him as calm, measured, and deeply committed to doing right by others. From an early age, he seemed to carry an innate sense of responsibility, which made law enforcement not just a job for him, but a calling. After graduating from Angelo State University, Padron joined the U.S. Marine Corps, where he served honorably. The discipline, structure, and sense of duty he found in the Marines carried over into his later career in policing. Following his military service, he returned to his hometown and spent more than a decade serving with the San Angelo Police Department. There, he became known not only for his professionalism, but also for his approachability. He wasn't the kind of cop who relied on intimidation. He was the kind who knew how to de-escalate, how to listen, how to treat people with dignity, even in moments of tension. In 2008, seeking new challenges and opportunities, Padron moved to Austin and joined the Austin Police Department. By then, he was already a seasoned officer, as well as a father, and a man who had dedicated the better part of his adult life to protecting others. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need recognition to know his worth. Off-duty, Padron was a devoted dad to his 2 daughters. He was devoted, attentive, and deeply proud of his family. He coached their soccer teams, showed up to school events, and tried to balance the heavy emotional load that comes with police work, along with the joys and responsibilities of fatherhood. For him, the badge was just one part of who he was. At home, he was a dad, just a regular man trying to raise good kids and make it home safe every night. On April 6, 2012, Padron responded to a police call that, on its face, seemed routine. A potentially intoxicated individual was behaving erratically in a North Austin Walmart. These are the kinds of calls police officers get every day. No sirens, no weapons drawn, just an officer walking into a situation with the goal of resolving it peacefully. This was Padron's mindset when he entered the store that night, but what happened next turned the routine call into a tragedy. In an attempt to prevent the suspect from fleeing, Padron tackled him to the ground. In a scuffle that followed, he would be killed. The news of Padron's death rippled through Austin and far beyond, not just because he was an officer killed in the line of duty, but because of who he was. Tributes poured in from fellow officers, as well as community members, friends, and strangers who had never met him, but were touched by the life he led, and devastated by the way it ended. Jaime's story is not just one of sacrifice, but of service. He represented the best of what policing can be, thoughtful, compassionate, and rooted in a desire to help others. His death was a profound loss, not only to the department and his family, but to a community that needed more people like him. He left behind 2 young daughters, a grieving family, and a legacy that continues in the form of scholarships, memorials, and the stories shared by those who knew him. More than a uniform and more than a badge, Jaime was a man who chose every day to walk into uncertainty for the sake of others, and ultimately gave us his life doing just that. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the case of Brandon Daniels, the software engineer that would go on to kill a cop. This case tends to provoke a lot of extreme reactions, which we were quick to notice based solely on the emails asking us to cover it. Some of the emails asked us to go over and in essence debunk the defense that Daniel would later put forward, while others asked for us to cover his case in order to prove that he was unfairly penalized. These emails were often strongly worded and somewhat aggressive, but we decided to cover the case in the hopes that we could thoughtfully break down what occurred and observe what conclusions you're left with. A list of sources that we used will be left in the description box down below, should you want to verify our reporting and make sure that what we're saying in this case is accurate. As always, if there's a video you would like to see, or a case you would like us to discuss on the channel, let me know by emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. We're consistently going through your emails and adding them to our list, even though it may take a while. We have a long list, so please be patient with us. But with all of that said, let us begin. Brandon Daniels' early life didn't immediately suggest the kind of path that would one day end on death row. Daniel was, by many accounts, a quiet, intelligent young man. He was described by his mother as being brilliant, with her stating that he was able to talk by the age of 1 and read by the age of 3. He sought out knowledge wherever he could, often taking interest in something, then teaching it to himself, like guitar or electronics. Those who knew him during these formative years described someone thoughtful and introspective, a person who seemed more comfortable behind a keyboard than in the center of attention. However, Brandon also had a propensity to jump to extreme anger over small slights. For example, in the 6th grade, Daniel would lash out at one of his female classmates over an unspecified incident. According to witnesses, he ran over to her during recess one morning, cursed at her, and then stated in explicit detail that he was going to come to her house in the night and rape her. Then in high school, he would also physically assault another boy in the locker room. According to the school's records, Brandon showed no remorse for either of these instances, and instead felt they were perfectly justified. Between the ages of 11 and 13, Brandon would begin using recreational drugs frequently, taking whatever he could get his hands on. Though he was incredibly intelligent, he enjoyed disobeying authority figures in his life, seeing how far he could push them before they snapped, and routinely sought out ways to defy them. Daniel would also express that he was extremely depressed during this time, and may have been defiant as a way to try and gain some amount of attention or validation. So he was intelligent but extremely defiant, so much so that when he was 16 years old, his parents would agree to send him to military school. They hoped the structured atmosphere would better teach him discipline and to treat others with respect. However, he immediately went AWOL, running away from the school and hiding out with his aunt for a few months. His aunt would later state that she took Brandon in because he had nowhere else to go and didn't want her nephew sleeping on the streets. Her only stipulation was that he did not drink or do drugs while living in her home, and when she found he'd been drinking her alcohol the entire time he was living with her, she kicked him out. At 19 years old, Brandon Daniel had his first significant run-in with law enforcement. On January 25, 2007, while riding his motorcycle near Denver, Colorado, Daniel was spotted by Officer Sean Wyckoff, speeding at 80 miles an hour in a 55 zone. When Wyckoff attempted to initiate a traffic stop, Daniel didn't slow down. Instead, he accelerated, weaving through lanes at dangerously high speeds. Though Officer Wyckoff was unable to apprehend him, Daniel eventually pulled over for another responding officer. When stopped, it was discovered that while the motorcycle was registered, the plates weren't attached. He also lacked the proper endorsement on his license to operate a motorcycle. A small amount of marijuana, just 0.2 ounces, was found in his pocket. When questioned, Daniel admitted he was, quote, out joyriding. Instead, he fled because he didn't want to get caught and didn't want to lose his license or his bike. He would go on to be arrested at least 4 more times that year, but each time was able to narrowly evade taking any real responsibility. On another occasion, Brandon was caught on a drunk driving charge. Facing potential jail time, he would avoid incarceration by offering information to authorities about a campus drug dealer. In December 2011, Brandon Daniel was pulled over for speeding on a stretch of highway between Amarillo and Lubbock. When Department of Public Safety trooper Charles Hoover approached the vehicle, he immediately noticed a strong, unmistakable odor of burnt marijuana. A quick search of Daniel's car turned up a marijuana grinder as well as a pipe and several pill bottles, labeled as medical marijuana, though the prescriptions appeared to belong to someone from Colorado, not Daniel himself. Despite the circumstances, Daniel remained composed. When questioned, he didn't resist or grow agitated. Instead, much like previous encounters with law enforcement, he attempted to frame himself in a favorable light. He made polite conversation with the trooper, describing himself as a productive member of society. This same pattern repeated just 6 months later, in February of 2012, when he was arrested again, this time for driving while intoxicated. During that second encounter, Officer Knopp noted that Daniel once again brought up his role as a former police informant in Colorado, a detail he volunteered without prompting. It seemed, to Knopp, like an attempt to leverage goodwill or leniency. While nothing about Daniel's demeanor was hostile, the underlying message was clear. He wanted the officers to see him not as a criminal, but as someone useful, someone cooperative, someone who, in his view, didn't belong in the back of a squad car. But these efforts to deflect consequences only highlighted a recurring pattern, trying to talk his way out of trouble rather than facing it head-on. But despite his repeated run-ins with the law, Daniel was still viewed as an incredibly intelligent, well-put-together individual. His friends would laugh at his antics, and he always seemed to find new ways to sidestep any real consequence. Daniel landed a job as a software engineer at Hewlett-Packard in Austin, Texas, a position that suggested stability and future potential. It was a well-paying job with a room for growth, and for a while, it seemed like he was settling into the kind of adult life that many aspire to: gainful employment, a promising career, and a chance to build something meaningful. He lived in a modest apartment, rode his bicycle to work, and generally kept a low profile. Friends and former colleagues have said that Daniel struggled with depression, a condition that worsened significantly after a difficult breakup with a girlfriend. His use of benzodiazepines, particularly Xanax, escalated after the relationship ended, with him taking multiple bars a day, alongside alcohol. His behavior grew more erratic, his moods unpredictable. During this time, he would meet a woman named Christina Nance through an ad he placed on Craigslist. According to Nance, whenever she saw Brandon, he would, quote, be popping Xanax like candy, unquote, and bragged about various crimes he had committed and gotten away with. For her part, Christina thought he was lying in order to make himself appear more interesting. On April 5, 2012, Brandon's roommate, Kelvin Davis, would recall that they had spent some of the night drinking and smoking weed while hanging out together. Davis was trying to get Daniel's mind away from the breakup, but every now and again, Brandon would go into the other room to cry and talk to his mother. When he wasn't distraught, he was witnessed taking multiple bars of Xanax, and wondering aloud what it would be like to, quote, hit a store, unquote. He would also allegedly tell his roommate that he had already done, quote, worse shit before and gotten away with said crime. Davis, like Nance, didn't believe his roommate, largely because he was well off and didn't need to rob anyone. Brandon had a high-paying job at Hewlett-Packard. He was living well below his means and could afford to get whatever he wanted. He most likely had more money in his bank account than whatever Walmart's registers had in them at 12 a.m. So the very concept that he would need to execute some form of that plan was ridiculous. He thought that, at most, Daniel was trying to make himself feel better by bragging about non-existent accomplishments, that he was so heavily impaired that he was just saying anything to get the desired response, and ultimately, Kelvin ignored him. Davis would go to sleep around 9:30 p.m., believing his roommate would eventually do the same, but that was far from the case. Daniel's statements about robbing a store were genuine. He wanted to see how much the store kept in the register, to test if he could get away with it, and once the idea had appeared in his head, he felt like he needed to see it through. He'd never had to deal with the consequences of his actions before, at least not in any significant way, so why would this be any different? His judgment was extremely impaired, but when he left his apartment that night, he would bring along a backpack to store the items he planned to shoplift, as well as a Jimenez .380 pistol loaded with hollow point bullets to use either to rob the store or to get away from police. He knew that what he was about to do was wrong and would likely result in someone being killed, but when he left his apartment that night, he knew what he wanted to do. Daniels would leave the apartment and drive to a Walmart on his motorcycle. He was immediately noticed by staff due to his obvious intoxication. He had approached various employees, asking them questions, and was very obviously shoplifting. According to one employee, it appeared as if he wanted them to approach him. He had placed nearly $60 worth of food and alcohol in his backpack while in the store, in plain view of the employees, but understanding that he was drunk and would likely be belligerent, the staff did their best to keep their distance and call the police. Jaime Padron would arrive at the Walmart and approach Brandon. According to the CCTV footage and the testimony from witnesses, Jaime was approximately 100 yards away from Daniels when he asked the man to stop so they could talk. Brandon, realizing that Jaime was a police officer and that he was in some kind of trouble, began to sprint towards the exit. Unbeknownst to Jaime and the employees in the Walmart, Brandon reached for his gun. The officer gave chase and quickly tackled the intoxicated man. According to witnesses, before the two had even touched the ground, Daniels had withdrawn a weapon that he'd been hiding on his person, and Padron had been shot once. Brandon then raised his gun to the officer's neck and shot him a second time. One of the employees jumped into action, wanting to ensure that no one else would be hurt in their store, and jumped onto Daniel, hoping to disarm him at the very least. Daniel then fired a third shot that barely missed the employee's head. Luckily, he was able to wrestle the gun away from Brandon, and another employee was able to kick it out of arm's reach. But after subduing the intoxicated man, Brandon would look up at the officer he had shot and laugh, reportedly gleeful that he, quote, killed a cop, unquote. In order to get away with shoplifting and public intoxication, Brandon had killed a cop and attempted to shoot another innocent person. After being taken into custody, Brandon Daniel was placed in the back of Officer Albert Arevallo's patrol car. From the start, his behavior struck an unsettling chord. Albert later testified that Daniel smiled and even winked at him through the rear window, an act that felt oddly casual considering the gravity of what had just taken place. As the officer sat nearby, Daniel began asking pointed questions. Were they in Travis or Williamson County? Which county, he wondered aloud, tended to be more lenient with sentencing? It became clear that Daniel was already thinking ahead, not with fear or remorse, but with a kind of cold calculation. He wanted to know if he was likely to face life in prison or the death penalty, how long the process would take, what it might cost to post bail, and even where his motorcycle would be impounded. His demeanor, as described by Officer Arevallo, was lethargic. His speech slurred, his eyes red and watery. At one point, Daniel was removed from the patrol car so EMS personnel could assess him. Christopher Lester, the paramedic on scene, testified that while Daniel showed no signs of alcohol use and denied taking drugs, his behavior suggested otherwise. Lester described him as blank, cold, and emotionally detached. During the evaluation, Daniel asked Lester the same question he posed to Arevalo: "Am I going to get life in prison for this?" Later on, Officer Corey Knopp transported Daniel to the police station. Knopp recalled Daniel pressing his face against the divider glass, slumping down in the back seat, his movements slow and disoriented, classic signs of someone under the influence of a central nervous system depressant. When they arrived at the station, Daniel's attention was briefly caught by an old police motorcycle, which he casually remarked as cool. Then, unprompted, he said aloud, "Hey, I killed a cop." Brandon would then be brought into a police interrogation room in order to get his version of events.
Robert, he was obviously disoriented. Still, Brandon Daniel said plenty. And when it comes time for this jury to decide whether or not he deserves the death penalty, what he said inside that patrol car may be something this jury remembers. Almost right away, Brandon Daniel knew the death penalty could be in his future. The video is hard to hear in parts, but subtitles decipher him wondering about the lethal injection and going away for a while. Once they started driving, he even taunted officers. Swaying all over while in the back seat, Daniel tries to get officers' attention, even asking to go to the bathroom. But Jaime Padron's family left the courtroom when he tried to find positives of going to prison after killing an officer: free food and no work. Daniel appeared to get emotional as evidence showed graphic pictures and other items taken from the crime scene, including his .380 handgun. But any remorse he may have had about Padron's death definitely could not be found in the video.
The following footage was made public in its entirety by the channel OPTV. I will leave a link in the description box down below to the original upload, along with the channel itself. The audio is pretty poor quality, so it's a little hard to hear, so apologies.
So from what I understand, you're living over there at the Waters Park apartment, you were saying?
Yes, ma'am.
And this incident happened kind of close to there?
Yes.
Okay. What was going on, Sonny? Were you out earlier in the night doing something?
Because I got left home and I had taken some drugs.
Okay, what kind of drugs?
I had taken Xanax.
Is that something that you normally take at night?
No, I haven't done it.
Sitting in the interrogation room, Brandon Daniel claimed he hadn't taken anything. No drugs, no alcohol, just an ordinary night gone wrong. But that story didn't match the version told by everyone else during the trial. According to his friends, Daniel hadn't just been drinking. He'd been drowning. Xanax in handfuls, alcohol from the moment he woke up, and behavior so visibly impaired that even the closest to him were starting to worry. One friend would later describe him as being in a constant fog, at least in the weeks before the shooting. So why lie? Why claim sobriety when the evidence, both physical, behavioral, and testimonial, clearly pointed to the opposite? Because he is cognizant of how the officer sitting across from him might view the situation if he were honest. He knows that admitting that he had a problem with the medication might make the interviewer view him in a more negative light, and he doesn't want that. Sure, he just killed another officer, but this denial shows that he is somewhat aware of the situation, that he knows the difference between right and wrong, and he knows what is and isn't socially acceptable to say. But Brandon's story doesn't stop with denial. He asked which county he was in, Travis or Williamson. That's not confusion, that is calculation. According to research published in the Journal of Psychiatry and Law, individuals under the influence of depressants like Xanax may experience impaired memory and impulse control, but most retain a core understanding of right and wrong, especially when it comes to the consequences that affect them personally. In other words, you might be too impaired to drive safely, but still sober enough to know that you're breaking the law.
2 or 3 times.
Was this with like a roommate or a group of people, or was it just you on your own?
Just me on my own.
And how big was the Xanax, I guess?
4 bars.
4 bars? Is that, when you have taken it before, is that a normal amount?
Yeah. I just did take about 2 bars.
Oh, you normally take 2.
So it's a little bit more than usual.
What time was that around?
Well, I thought it was 11 p.m., so I don't know, like 9 p.m.
9 p.m.? Okay. And then what happened?
And then I decided to go on a ride on my motorcycle. I was thinking very clearly. And went to the Walmart and I decided to shoplift a bunch of items.
I decided to shoplift a bunch of stuff. No hesitation, no misdirection, just a blunt admission. And that one sentence carries more weight than it might seem at first, because it tells us something crucial. This was not accidental. Brandon didn't absent-mindedly wander into the aisles of Walmart, stuffing items into his bag without understanding what he was doing. He wasn't too intoxicated to remember, or too impaired to form intent. He planned to steal. He chose to walk into that store with a loaded, pre-cocked gun in his waistband, hollow point bullets chambered and ready. That detail matters. Hollow points don't just appear in a weapon by chance. They're designed for maximum internal damage. It's not something you carry unless you've considered what happens when you pull the trigger. So, let's stop and consider that picture. A man walks into a Walmart with a gun that's ready to fire, in a mindset prepared for a confrontation. He's not unsure of where he is or why he's there. He's committing to a course of action, one that he fully expects could end violently. In the field of forensic psychology, this clarity of narrative, especially immediately after a crime, can be incredibly revealing. Impaired individuals often struggle with recall. They give fragmented timelines, their speech trails off, they dodge direct questions or contradict themselves. But as for Brandon, he was almost too direct. This isn't the profile of someone who didn't know what they were doing. It's the profile of someone who did, and seemingly hoped that afterwards, the fog of intoxication might serve as a shield. But statements like, "I decided to shoplift," pierce right through that defense.
And on the way out, our cop saw me, and I panicked, and I pulled my gun out and shot him.
Okay. What kind of gun?
It was a 380.
380? Is that something you normally carry on you?
From time to time, because I've gotten threats before.
Threats?
I've worked as an informant in different situations.
For
Douglas County in Colorado.
Tecos? Tecos, is that what you said, county?
Douglas County.
Douglas County, okay. So because of some past things that have come up with being an informant or past situations in Colorado, you began carrying a 380?
Yes.
Okay, and you've lived here for about a year and a half?
For about a year and a half. I also did, I worked for Larimer County Drug Task Force.
Larimer?
Both.
Okay, and is that in Colorado as well?
Correct.
Is that as an informant?
Yes, ma'am.
Larimer County and then Douglas County?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You're not wanted out of Colorado?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So you left under good standing in Colorado?
Yes, ma'am.
So you did you were an informant, everything was fine, and then you just got a job here, so you came here?
Yes, I've met one drug dealer who has been a major drug dealer for a decade almost, and apparently it was a fairly big bust.
In Colorado?
In Colorado, yes.
Okay, and then they wanted you to get out of town because of it, or what?
Yeah, well, I was about to graduate from college, and then I got a job offer here in Austin. It makes you lose your memory really badly, and from then I took the bike out.
And you're talking about a motorcycle?
Motorcycle,
Okay.
correct.
What kind of motorcycle do you have?
It's a Kawasaki ZX-10.
And where did you go? Where did you ride to?
First I just rode around, and then I saw Walmart.
Is this the Walmart, like right at Palmer and 35, or which Walmart are we talking about?
Shoot. It was Palmer on 35.
I mean, did you go like a great distance when you were driving? Or?
I did go a great distance, but I circled around some, and it's very difficult to piece it together.
Okay. But it was a Walmart, and you kind of circled back, and it might have been near your residence somewhere?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know what time you got there?
It's hard to recall. 8 or 8:30.
Was it just gotten dark?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then what did you do in the Walmart?
In the Walmart, I went in and looked for things that I needed. I I got them all in bags. I had a backpack with me. Then when I saw that there were no cameras, I put them in the back of my backpack.
You put them in like the Walmart bags and then you put those bags in your backpack?
Yes. And then I proceeded to walk out. When I walked out, I saw one officer and one cleanly closed loss prevention associate. The officer told me to stop, and I knew what he was after. And I had a .380 in my pocket, so I figured that the consequences might be worse. So I ran. The car grabbed me, and I turned around and shot him.
What Brandon says here is borderline nonsensical, even though it is the truth. Yes, he went to the Walmart that night intending to steal. He knew exactly what he was doing. He made a performance out of it, walking through the store in plain view, slipping alcohol and food into his backpack after purposely drawing the attention of store employees. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't impulsive. It was intentional, the kind of shoplifting that almost dares someone to intervene. So employees called the police. Officer Jaime Padron answered, and suddenly Brandon panicked. In that moment, faced with the very consequence his actions had invited, his logic fractured. He didn't try to run, he didn't drop the bag and apologize, and he didn't freeze. Brandon directly stated that he believed shooting the police officer was, somehow, a better outcome than being caught shoplifting under the influence. That killing someone, in his altered mental state, seemed more survivable than facing arrest for a nonviolent theft. That idea, that the punishment for petty theft would outweigh the consequences of murder, is irrational. But it's not uncommon in moments of acute panic, especially when layered over substance abuse, chronic anxiety, and poor impulse control. According to research published in the Journal of Criminal Justice and Behavior, individuals under the influence of benzodiazepines often display heightened threat perception and impaired consequence evaluation, especially when stress levels spike. In other words, someone like Brandon, already under chemical and emotional pressure, might interpret a relatively minor threat, like being arrested for shoplifting, as catastrophic. And when the brain thinks it's cornered, it doesn't always choose flight or freeze. Sometimes it chooses fight, even when it doesn't make any rational sense.
Okay, so you had the gun in like a front pocket, or
Front pocket.
like the right or the left?
The right pocket.
So you just plainly carry it, like just hide it in the pocket?
Yes.
Okay, and then you're talking about these pants that you wearing now?
These pants I'm wearing now.
Okay, so in the right front pocket?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you came out of one of the main doors at the Walmart.
Yes, ma'am.
So they were kind of just sitting there talking? The officer and the loss prevention guy?
They were eyeballing me, so they knew that they were going to confront me.
And the officer said, what in your words?
The officer said, will you please step next to me? Will you please follow me? And then I took off running.
Just any particular direction, or?
I went towards the exit.
Okay, so this was still inside the store?
Yes, ma'am.
They kind of approached you before you hit those doors to go outside?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the officer says, please, come over here, please step aside with me over here, and you were just...
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so how far did you get when you were running?
4 or 5 feet.
And then, what did the officer do?
He grabbed me, and I turned around and I saw his face, and I shot him.
He just grabbed you from behind?
He grabbed my arm, and but my right arm was loose, and that's the one that had the gun.
So you grabbed your left arm?
He grabbed my left arm and shoulder.
Okay, so you're running and he grabbed you like up here?
This one.
And you kind of turned?
Turned around, yes.
But this hand was already free, the right hand?
That one was free, and once he started to talk to me, I had my hand in my pocket, ready to go.
So the minute you saw him, you were kind of like, oh, I know where this is going.
Well,
The two guys talking.
Well, I figured if I could escape, then I wouldn't have avoided the situation, but yes, premeditated, whatever.
So even though Brandon is objectively impaired, he just said that him shooting Officer Padron was premeditated. When he left his apartment, he didn't know who he was going to shoot, but he was ready for it to happen, and chose to act in a way to gain police attention, because this was the result he wanted.
Knowing you had a gun on you and everything, you were just like, oh, I need to get out of here because this charge is going to be even worse.
Correct.
So while they were kind of confronting you, you put your hand in your right pocket.
Correct.
Okay. And then while you were fleeing, you kind of just kept your hand in, or you pulled the gun out right away, or?
While I was fleeing, I pulled it out right away.
And we're talking 4 or 5 steps.
Yes, ma'am.
So then he gets the shoulder, and when you turn, his face is kind of like right there.
Yes, it was kind of a jumble until I turned around and I saw a clear shot of his face. And
So then the gun's in your right hand.
yes, ma'am.
And then, did you pull it up, or shoot it from your hip, or?
I pulled it up directly to his face.
Right to his face?
Correct.
How far away were you from, like, me to you right now with my hand? How far away?
That's about the perfect distance.
From me to him.
Yes, ma'am.
And then you shot him.
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you shoot him?
It was hard to tell, but I believe square in the face.
Square in the face?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times did you fire?
1.
And then what happened?
And then the other officers tackled me, and it was over.
There was more than one uniform officer, or are you talking about like the loss prevention officer?
I believe it was loss prevention. All I said was 1 officer who was down.
One officer was down?
As a reminder, Daniel shot Padron twice and attempted to shoot the loss prevention officer as well, and narrowly missed his face.
1 officer who I shot was down, he had blood on his face.
And then you got tackled?
Yeah.
Because, you don't remember somebody in uniform tackling you, or just somebody tackling you?
Just tackled, and then it was kind of a blur at that point.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about what happened?
I feel like my life's over.
And was your 380, was it loaded completely to capacity?
It was fully loaded with 1 in the chamber.
Is that how you taught?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that how you normally carry it?
That's not how I normally carry it, but when I went into the store, I didn't want to be cocking it if something was going to happen,
Daniel's admitting in this instance that he purposely pre-cocked the gun before entering because he knew he was going to get in some kind of confrontation. He wasn't quite sure on the specifics, but it seemed that he went out looking to kill someone that night. But instead of shooting a stranger or attacking someone he knew personally, he wanted to justify the murder in some way. Because the officer was going to penalize him, he had to shoot him. Because Padron was trying to apprehend him, it was self-defense. Because he was under the influence, he actually is not responsible, and so on. He set out to cause a conflict, to get police attention put on him, so that he could justify his actions later on. But Officer Padron could have easily been the loss prevention worker, or any other member of the Walmart staff, because Daniel didn't care. Daniel had been in trouble with the law before, and he had always gotten out of it without facing any massive consequences. So why should this be any different?
So you just got it ready just in case?
I got it ready, yeah.
Okay, so you're pretty much ready to go from the beginning. I mean, you went over there, you had the intention of shoplifting?
I had the intention of shoplifting. I did not have the intention of shooting anybody.
You got the gun ready just in case there was an issue?
I got correct.
And how do you feel, like right now as we're talking, how do you feel about shooting that cop?
I feel horrible. I feel like it's over. I don't know how to explain it.
I mean, do you feel horrible for yourself because your life is over?
I feel very bad for the officer who's doing his job and has kids, and I saw his face, and
What did his face look like when you saw it?
there was blood coming in. There's blood coming out of his eyes, and asthmatic and stuff.
Was he saying anything?
He was gurgling.
And when you first saw him, when he turned around and he turned to you, did he say anything to you at that point?
I don't think he could say anything. He could just barely gurgle.
This is when you saw him on the ground?
Yes.
Okay. When you ran your 4 or 5 steps, and he got, kind of grabbed your shoulder and you turned around, did he have time to say something to you? Did he get anything out? Did you hear him yelling at you while you were kind of taking your steps to run away?
When I first ran, he said, "I'm a cop." And then there was 4 steps where 3 or 4 people were screaming, and I couldn't decipher who said which.
And what, say the 3 or 4 people who were screaming, what were they screaming?
They were screaming, "Stop, this is lost prevention, lost police, or this police officers," and things like that.
Okay, so he said, "I want you to step over here, blah, 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 blah," and then when you turned to run, he said, "I'm a cop."
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get arrested to the ground, or did it just went from when you shot him, or what?
I think it's from when I shot him.
Okay, so when you shot him, there was a amount that came back onto you.
Yes.
Okay. And then the distance that we portrayed earlier was a pretty accurate distance of how far away you were.
It was about 1 foot or so.
The guy that tackled you, did he say anything?
I think there was 2 or 3 people who tackled me, and they just said, just you're an idiot, and, hold still, and things.
So, were you fighting still?
I wasn't fighting at all.
Were they telling you to hold still for any particular reason, or were they just saying it to say it?
I think they were just making sure I knew.
Where did I know you're saying that this all happened really quickly, and I understand that. I mean, you turn and you shoot, and, with blood and the tackle. Where did the gun go?
The gun, I must have dropped it right after I shot him.
He didn't drop it. Again, based on the CCTV footage and witness testimony, the gun had to be wrestled out of his hands and kicked away after he attempted to shoot one of the Walmart employees that tackled him. He was also fighting them after he was tackled, and only stopped when he realized that he was outnumbered and had objectively lost.
Consciously remember that, or you just believe that that's what you did?
That's what I believe.
Okay.
I don't have it with me, so I'm not sure where it is.
So you shot, and then right away you tackle, and something happened.
And then, it was overdose on my face with 4 people on me.
We're going to get somebody to come out and, take some photographs. Basically collect some of the evidence from your person, okay? So you have a lot of blood on you. Obviously, you're talking about it. It's from the officer. You just want to make sure that we document everything, okay? Is there anything else? Do you have any injuries on you?
I do not.
Are you injured in any way?
No, no.
What?
No, man.
No, okay. And your shoe is?
I'm missing my shoe. I don't know where it is, but I don't have the blood there either.
Okay. And then the sweatshirt?
Sweatshirt has blood on it.
Everything. Please. And your hands had some? Yes. Okay. Alright. I'm gonna make sure that that particular person's en route. It's a civilian who just comes and takes pictures and is kind of a crime scene person. And then I'll just make sure that we don't have any other questions for you. We might go through things again. Okay, so just want to make sure that we have everything. Is there anything that you want to say? Or that you want somebody to understand while we're sitting here talking?
I do want to say that I remember parts and pieces of it because I was on drugs, and that's all I want to say.
Okay.
Next step.
The next step we're going to have, like I said, we're going to have the crime scene person come in and process you, take photos of you and process everything. And then, from there, you'd be transported over to the Travis County jail, okay?
Okay.
But I'll be right back with you. And is there anything you need in the meantime, any water or anything like that?
No, thanks.
So that is where the interview ends, but Brandon was far from done. Brandon would plead not guilty to Jaime's murder. despite the CCTV footage, the witness statements, and his admission that he had killed the officer. Brandon Daniels' defense centered on the argument that his actions were not premeditated, but rather the result of severe intoxication and mental impairment. His legal team contended that Daniels' judgment was significantly compromised due to the influence of substances, particularly Xanax, at the time of the incident. His attorney portrayed Daniel as a once promising individual, a college-educated software engineer whose life had unraveled following a personal crisis. Hunt emphasized that Xanax can cause major personal changes, as well as distort perception and impair memory, suggesting that Daniel's mental state was severely affected during the incident. The defense also highlighted inconsistencies in Daniel's statements and his apparent confusion during police interviews, suggesting these were signs of his impaired mental state. They argued that these factors indicated a lack of intent to kill, challenging the prosecution's assertion of premeditation. A significant portion of their defense hinged on the fact that Brandon was deeply remorseful for what he had done, and that the murder was a solitary act that was so outside of his normal character that he couldn't have been in his right mind when it occurred. However, the state was able to show multiple instances where Brandon had gleefully taken credit for the killing while in prison. Brandon had bragged to another inmate that he had killed a cop, and asked if the other inmate had seen him on the news. He then provided a still image printout of the security camera footage after the murder, which showed him next to Jaime's deceased body. He told the other inmate that he liked to keep it on his person just in case. On a separate occasion while awaiting trial, Brandon was in the day room, and a news broadcast came on the television, discussing the case. When the broadcaster brought up how Daniel had killed a police officer, Brandon, who was supposedly deeply remorseful for what he had done, stood up and took a bow in front of everyone. His defense was subsequently hindered by letters Brandon would write to his mother, sister, and ex-girlfriend while awaiting trial. In recorded conversations with his mother, Daniel brought up the idea of murderabilia, a controversial term used to describe collectibles and artwork created by incarcerated individuals convicted of violent crimes. He spoke about the possibility of selling his own artwork from jail, suggesting that even behind bars, there might be ways to capitalize on his notoriety. In one exchange, he remarked, "As far as the prison pecking order goes in relation to crimes committed, I think I may be at the top." The comment came off not just as flippant, but utterly destroys the idea that he was deeply troubled by his actions. During a separate jail visit, Daniel discussed the idea of selling his story for a significant sum. He speculated that it could be worth as much as $100,000. He then signed off with a phrase that was equal parts cynical and unsettling. Quote, "Just living the dream. I'm retired at 25. His actions were completely incongruent with his lawyer's arguments, but that wasn't all. The prosecution was also able to find multiple instances of Brandon willfully breaking the law and acting out aggressively throughout his life, showcasing that he wasn't as innocent as his defense team would have liked the jury to believe. They brought out Brandon's roommate, friends, and ex-girlfriend, who all testified as to Brandon's behavior in the past, and his propensity to brag about breaking the law. Then they showed the CCTV footage of what happened that night, and went over how, even though he was impaired, he had thought through and executed his plan. After a 2-week trial, Brandon was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. After being sentenced, Brandon would be moved to death row and begin the appeals process. His attorneys presented 3 primary arguments challenging the death sentence. Number 1, insufficient evidence of future dangerousness. The defense contended that the prosecution failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Daniel would pose a continued threat to society, a requirement for imposing the death penalty in Texas. They emphasized Daniel's lack of prior violent offenses and argued that his actions were influenced by a combination of factors, including severe intoxication from Xanax, a traumatic brain injury, a history of impulse control issues, and a troubling upbringing. Number 2, mental health and substance abuse considerations. Daniel's attorneys highlighted his struggles with depression and substance abuse, asserting that these issues impaired his judgment and decision-making at the time of the offense. They argued that these mitigating factors should have been given more weight during sentencing. Number 3, challenging the use of jailhouse behavior as evidence. The defense objected to the prosecution's use of Daniel's behavior while incarcerated as evidence of his lack of remorse and future dangerousness. They argued that these actions were not indicative of his character or threat level. However, in 2018, this appeal was rejected outright. In 2020, Brandon would write down the following letter, giving it to a third party in order for it to be published on adoptaninmate.org. To whom it may concern. My name is Brandon Daniel. I'm writing this letter to you from prison. With police brutality once again in the news, and legal reform a hot topic of discussion, I'm writing to tell you about my legal case, in the hope that I might be able to spread awareness about a common but little-known condition that is responsible for sending others to prison, and perhaps to leverage your platform to gain support as well. My case involves the class of anti-anxiety medication called benzodiazepines, and is one of the clearest examples of something called paradoxical reaction. I am hoping that you can help me. Let me fill you in on my story. First, my background is relevant because it demonstrates that the event that led to me being here was not part of a pattern of behavior. I have no violence in my past, no felonies. I was a software engineer, I'm college educated, and I'm from a normal, middle-class home. Everything that happened that night was completely atypical and out of character. The event took place at a Walmart, so it was all captured on surveillance videos. You can see me stumble around the store for 20 minutes, dropping items and running into displays. I was clearly disoriented. A police officer was called, and he confronted me, tackled me, and in the chaos of the moment, I shot and killed him. The video shows how hectic the situation was. It was clearly not a thought-out and intentional act. It took place in the span of 10 seconds. Subsequent blood tests revealed that I had 11 times the therapeutic dose of Xanax in my system. And these tests were taken 7 hours after the event. With a half-life of 11 hours, it is reasonable to assume that the amount of Xanax in my blood that night was extraordinarily high. Plus, as I later discovered, Asians metabolize benzos faster than other populations, and it stays in their systems longer. I am of Asian descent. In addition to all of this, I was interviewed by police immediately after the event, while I was still highly impaired from the medication. Again, this interview was captured on video, and one can clearly see that I am suffering from the classic symptoms of benzodiazepines. I had amnesia, stating several times that I couldn't even remember what time or day it was. I was confabulating, giving different accounts of what happened, none of which turned out to be accurate, and I was experiencing chemical submission, complying with the detective's leading questions against my best interest. All of these are common side effects of the benzodiazepine class of pharmaceuticals, which includes the date rape drug, roofies. This aspect of my case sets me apart from other similar cases, I believe. My confused statements provide a window into my state of mind at the time, while in many other incidents, we can only wonder what is going on in their mind. After all of this, while awaiting trial, the jailhouse doctors put me on a cocktail of antidepressants, Zoloft, Zalexa, Remeron, etc. During this time, I had several suicide attempts and spent most of the time in observation cells, nearly catatonic. It's my belief that this common secondary use of pharmaceuticals to medicate inmates awaiting trial renders them complacent and fairly useless when it comes to contributing to their defense. This results in inmates who are resigned to their fate, able to be easily railroaded by the legal system, regardless of the merits of their case. Since most people who are first entering jail are, understandably, depressed, they are all too willing to accept this, quote, treatment. In my case, my trial team was handpicked by the judge. They agreed to work for a flat fee, and they put on a subpar defense at the last minute. The public opinion surrounding my case was continuously manipulated by statements released from the pharmaceutical company. In many news articles, the fact that I was even on Xanax at all is never mentioned. I've learned that this is a common tactic used by the pharma industry, who often deploy crash teams to these type of events to try and shift the blame away from their drugs. I was convicted and sent to Texas death row, where I am today. Years into my sentence, I was able to finally get off of the psychiatric medications. Then I began to research the history of pharmaceuticals, and I became aware of their role in many cases of violence such as mine. In fact, this is a well-documented symptom of benzos that's sometimes called paradoxical reaction or rage reaction. It's also related to the phenomenon called homicidal somnambulism or sleepwalking murder. Many other cases can be found in the medical literature, and these types of drugs have come up in the toxicology reports of several, quote, mass shooters, including the Las Vegas shooter and the Sutherland Springs church shooter. Over the past 2 decades, prescriptions for benzos have skyrocketed, and so has the number of overdoses, which has risen 8-fold since 1999. This time period also coincides with the epidemic of mass shootings in our country. It is certain that the prison population overrepresented by benzo users who are unaware that this drug contributed to their situation. This is a major reason for my speaking out, to inform others about the possible influence on their crime. Since my trial, my lawyers and I have accumulated a massive amount of research proving that this is not a one-off event, but is a well-known phenomenon in the medical community that has been actively covered up by the pharmaceutical industry for decades. I have scientific articles, expert evaluations, and even an internal FDA study that highlights the extreme number of violent episodes associated with benzodiazepines compared to other drugs. This FDA study was not released to the public and was only acquired through FOIA requests put out by lawyers. Now, my goal is to use my story to help expose this issue. Books have been written about pharmaceutical-induced violence, but I really feel that my case is the clearest example of such an event. By reaching out to you with this letter, I am hoping to use your platform to help spread my story, to garner support from the activist community, and to make contacts with any lawyers, expert witnesses, and fundraising apparatuses that might be able to help. My friends and family have compiled information about my case on a website, supportbrandondaniel.org. I am asking that you please post about my site on your social media accounts and link it up to your website. Any other exposure or resources would be very much appreciated. I really hope that you can help. Please contact me at the address below. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Brandon Daniel. Despite the call to action at the end of the letter, it failed to make any real waves, besides a few comments left on the post itself. Though some people agreed with his points about pharmaceutical companies, they bristled at the fact that he mentioned police brutality in his letter, as he had not been a victim in any sense of the word. They also noted that he was seemingly pushing any and all responsibility for his actions off of himself, despite having deliberately brought a gun into Walmart, already cocked so it was ready to fire, which indicated a degree of premeditation. Shortly thereafter, on October 30th of 2021, Brandon would be found in his cell, unresponsive, seemingly from an overdose of medication that he had been hoarding. If you've made it to this portion in the video, thank you for watching. Let us know your takeaway from the case, whether you believe Daniel should be on death row or if he deserved a lighter sentence. Do you believe that the drugs that he was on caused him to murder Officer Padron, or do you feel like it was in his character? Let us know why or why not. Again, all the information we used to formulate this video will be left in the description box down below, and regardless of where you stand, please be courteous in the comments. As always, if there is a video you would like to see us make or a story you want to bring more attention to, let me know by emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. Remember, stay safe.